But I've noticed since chemo, where's 2 Samuel? Anyway.
After 1 Samuel?
So, yeah. Yeah. Anyway. All right. So anyway, we're going to come at this from a different angle. And the reason is, earlier this week, Michelle told me, remember, it's Memorial Day coming up. And for me, Memorial Day and Veterans Day, I get mixed up all the time. Because to me, they're the same. If you're remembering or memorializing a person that's died in the service of their country, then they got to be a veteran, right? It's just since they're not with us anymore, we don't say they're a veteran, we call it Memorial Day. Well, as you know me, I like to relate things to the Bible. That way people hear the Bible in response to something or a story or something. And I do that all the time. People will say, blah, 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 this and this happened. I go, that reminds me of a story in the Bible. And then I go into it, next thing I know, I'm sharing the gospel. Right? And they'll go, well, does every thing that happens to you relate to the Bible? Yes, it does. Because the Bible is written in a format that is like that. I don't know if you know this, but about a third of the Old Testament that was written by Moses actually is in poetic form. You actually, or the children of Israel would sing it, going places. And we don't see that in English. So, anyway, the way that I share the gospel a lot of times is through history. People will say, I was standing here the other day and I saw something and I go, oh, well, isn't that interesting? The reason you saw that is because blah, blah, blah. This is what happened 150 years ago and that's why that's there. And they go, I never knew that. And I say, it's just like a story in the Bible. Anyway. So, Memorial Day, Veterans Day is the same to me. When I see those 2 days, they're interlinked to me. So, I asked God on Tuesday, what do you want me to teach on this Sunday? And I put a stipulation on it that has to do with Memorial Day. Right? And I didn't hear anything for 2 days. And in Thursday evening, he goes, have you ever thought about Uriah? Now, I don't know if you've ever had God say that to you, but it's odd. Have you ever thought about Uriah? How many know the story of Uriah the Hittite in the Bible? No. You know what you know? David and Bathsheba. Right? You've heard of David and Bathsheba, that whole situation. Well, we're going to read that. But you don't think about Uriah the Hittite. Well, guess who Bathsheba's husband was? Uriah the Hittite. Okay? So we're going to come at this story from that angle because, and toward the end of this, you will see why God chose it for Memorial. Ready? Chapter 11 of 2 Samuel, verse 1. In the spring of the year, when kings normally go out to war, have you ever thought about the spring that way? I thought we always thought when the spring comes, that's when the blooms come, right? Spring brings showers. Have you ever thought that kings go out to war in the spring? You know why that is in the Middle East? It's too cold to fight in the winter. In the desert. You ever been in the desert when it's cold? The wind blows all the time. It's cold. You're hanging on to a big 2-foot piece of metal, your hand's going to get cold. So they went to war in the spring. I guess it's logical. I thought it was funny. All right. In the spring of the year, when kings normally go to war, David sent Joab and the Israelite army to fight the Ammonites. They destroyed the Ammonite army and laid siege to the city of Rabbah. However, David stayed behind in Jerusalem. 2 things interesting about this first paragraph. Number 1, why are they fighting the Ammonites? You remember when the children of Israel came into the promised land and they were supposed to destroy everybody? Yeah. And a lot of people have a hard time with that when they read that in the Bible. Right? They go, God sent the Jews to go kill a bunch of people? Do you know why that is? They were devil worshippers. Did you know that? God said that the land, which is now Israel, had been inhabited by the Canaanites for 1,000 years. And they sacrificed their children. They worshiped the god of Molech. And they did all kinds of disgusting things, and God had had enough. Now think about this. God eventually has enough with the crap we do. Just like a good parent sometimes says, I've had enough. Go to your room. I've had enough. Where's my belt? I've had enough. Go milk the goats. Right? Something. Right? And you go, well, Dad, we ain't got to go. Well, go get one and milk. So, the point is God had enough. Now, here's the other part of this story. God had given them 1,000 years to repent. I like to bring that out when people go, I just don't like the God of the Old Testament. I'm like, you don't like the story of a parent loving their creation and them having enough? Them putting up with enough? When you say it like that, they go, well, that's not what I mean. Well, eventually, God said enough. All right, so here we go. The other part of this is it says David stayed behind in Jerusalem. I thought all kings went out to war in the spring. What's he doing staying behind? Right? That doesn't sound like a good king. Verse 2. Late one afternoon, after his midday rest, David got out of bed and was walking around the roof of the palace. Number one, why is he on the roof of the palace? Is he inspecting the shingles? It looks like to me he's surveying his kingdom from a slightly different angle. As he looked out over the city, he noticed a woman of unusual beauty taking a bath. He sent someone to find out who she was, and he was told, she is Bathsheba, the daughter of Eliam, and the wife of Uriah the Hittite. There it is. Now, two things for you. Number one, what's he doing on the roof? Right? Number two, he notices this woman taking a bath. Number one, I want you to see it's not the woman's fault. David's on the roof. Right? When you're on the roof, how many of you ever got out and you never done this before when you was a kid and you got out on the roof? Don't you see things from a different perspective? You do. Don't you see things you didn't even know were there before? It's kind of like getting on Google and looking at your neighbor's backyard. Yeah. You ever thought about that? Every now and then, I don't know if you've ever noticed this, but every now and then, Google catches stuff on there that ain't supposed to be caught. Yeah. Did you know that there is a guy who has solved 7 murders through Google Maps? Wow. Yeah, just finding stuff on there going, hey, that's not supposed to be there. And he goes in and shows it to the police, and the police go, hey, that's the car we've been looking for 10 years. And they go look to where the car is because it's in a pond, and they find a body inside, and they realize this is the guy we've been missing for 10 years. Just thought that was interesting. So, what does that have to do with David being on the roof? He's seeing things from a different perspective. The other thing is why is Bathsheba on her roof taking a bath? It was custom in those days when a woman had finished her period to take a bath in front of a couple other women to show that she is now purified and she can go to the temple again. This was a holy thing she was doing. And David spied. Now, when you go, wait a minute, I thought David was a man after God's own heart. He is. Do you know why? You know why David's a man after God's own heart? Because he always repents of his sins. Whereas most of us just cover ours up. Or blame it on somebody else. Right? If you're in addiction, you blame it on somebody else. Is that what you do in addiction? Yeah. How many addicts in the room? Or used to be addicts. How many people's fault was it that we were addicts? Everybody. Everybody but mine. Right. Okay. So this was David's fault. Now, then David sent messengers to get her, and when she came to the palace, he slept with her. She had just completed the purification rites after her menstrual period. Then she returned home later when Bathsheba discovered that she was pregnant, she sent David a message saying, I am pregnant. Now, remember, David already found out this is the wife of Uriah, the Hittite. Now, I want to tell you a little story. Who knows who Uriah the Hittite is? Up until now, we only know that he's the husband of Bathsheba. Uriah the Hittite is one of the mighty 30 that used to ride around the desert with David for 20 years. This is one of David's best friends. Different perspective, Uriah the Hittite, what do you know about the Hittites? The Hittites are part of the Canaanites who were supposed to be destroyed way back in the day. Why didn't they destroy them? Do you know the Israelites in the northern kingdom, as they were trying to take over up by Damascus, what we call Jordan now? There was this area up there that the Hittites inhabited, and the Hittites were kick butt and take name guys. They were tougher than tough. They were like the Germans were to the Roman Empire. They called them barbarians back in the day. The Romans could not defeat the Germans. I don't know if you ever figured that out. They ruled the world for almost 700 years, and they couldn't defeat the Germans. How many of y'all are from German descent? Makes us pretty tough characters, right? We don't know how to quit. That's also slash for Okie. Okies don't know how to quit. Right. Okay. And some Texans. I had to. Because most Okies are from Texas. Anyway, so you go, okay, so he knew Uriah. He not only knew him, now he wants his wife. What does David know about Uriah? He's loyal. He's also a battle-hardened warrior. He's not afraid to fight anything except deception. Right? Now watch this. Then David sent word to Joab, send me Uriah the Hittite. So Joab sent him to David because where is Uriah? He's out fighting the battle. Right? Yeah. All right. When Uriah arrived, David asked him how Joab and the army were getting along and how was the war progressing. Almost like, how's the weather? How's that war going? The war I should be leading. Then he told Uriah, go on home and relax. David even sent a gift to Uriah after he had left the palace, but Uriah didn't go home. He slept that night at the palace entrance with the king's palace guard. Now, this is the point in which most preachers start pointing out things about David. This is the point I'm going to go sideways on. Now we're going to start focusing on Uriah. Ready? Where did Uriah go? At the king's palace at the gate. Why does he go there? What do all the good military people who are in service do when they're invited to the palace? They protect it. That's what they do. When David heard that Uriah had not gone home, verse 10, he summoned him and said, what's the matter? Why did you go home late last night after being away for so long? Uriah replied, watch this. The ark and the armies of Israel and Judah are living in tents, and Joab and my master's men, and Joab is the general, by the way, and my master's men are camping in the open fields. How could I go home to wine and dine and sleep with my wife? What did we just learn about Uriah? Honor. Loyalty. I'm a part of the crew over here fighting. Who's that we're fighting at this point? Ammonites. Because in this time there's a lot of fighting going on. You have to look at who you're fighting. He's fighting the Ammonites. Right? In fact, they've whooped their tail all the way to this town. And now what's left of the Ammonites are in this one town, and they've got them encircled. And that's when David calls Uriah back to the house. You mean I I fought for 6 months to get these guys corralled up, hemmed up in a place that we can finally take them out, and now you want me to come home? Look at the perspective of it.
Yeah.
Not only that, did you see what it says? It says it so flippantly. I think this is the only place in Scripture where it doesn't say the whole thing. The Ark of the Covenant. It just says the Ark. I want you to see that. You know why? Whenever the children of Israel went into battle, they always went in with their leader, and the leader made sure that the chief priest came and they took the Ark of the Covenant. That way God was in the battle.
Yep. Right.
It doesn't say the Ark of the Covenant here, it says the Ark. Like it's just, oh, by the way, the Ark is there. The place that God resides is with them in battle, and oh, it's just the Ark. But he says the Ark of the Covenant is there in the armies of Israel. See, you see something about Uriah. Now, let me tell you something else about Uriah. Uriah is a Hittite. That means he's not an Israelite. But because, I'm going to go back to the other story, because the children of Israel could never whoop the Hittites, they just made an agreement with them and married into them. Let them marry into them. And the Hittites, how many of you ever heard the story of the military in America around the 1940s? Who's the number one group of people that are drafted or pulled into the military on a regular basis? The Irish in America. Have you ever heard that? Have you ever heard of the gangs in New York and they say, who do you not want to fight? The Irish. What are Irish good at? Fighting and drinking.
I was going to say drinking.
That's what they used to say. Right? Now, we don't talk that way anymore because that's politically incorrect. But the Irish are good at fighting and drinking. Well, the Hittites were good at fighting. Right. And so the Israelites made a deal with them, and now they've become their best warriors. So guess what that makes Uriah the Hittite? An adopted Jew. Now, if you know anything about Roman adoption, when it uses adopt in the New Testament, that means when I adopt a child, that child I cannot divorce, I cannot get rid of, I cannot put away from me. I don't care what they've done. My own child, my birthed child, I can divorce, I can put away, I can pretend that they're not my child anymore. But in Roman culture, you could not do that with an adopted child. Looks like Uriah took that seriously. And since he's adopted, you can't get rid of me as a warrior. You can't get rid of me as a husband. You can't get rid of me as a loyal servant of David. Are you starting to see why I'm using it for Memorial Day?
Yes.
All right, watch this. Verse 12. Well, stay here today, David told him, and tomorrow you may return to Jerusalem. So Uriah stayed in Jerusalem that day and the next. Then David invited him to dinner and got him drunk. But even then, he couldn't get Uriah to go home to his wife. Again, he slept at the palace entrance with the king's palace door. What do you think of Uriah? Isn't he something else? This guy is the epitome of a loyal, honorable warrior who, when put to fight, that's what he does. It doesn't matter. That's what I do.
Yep. That's right. Yep.
So the next morning, David wrote a letter to Joab and gave it to Uriah to deliver. Now, when you're given a letter from the king, and he tells you to take it to your general, what does a good servant do? What does a good warrior do? He don't open the letter.
Yeah.
He just gives the letter to the general. But look what the letter is. The letter instructed Joab, station Uriah on the front lines where the battle is fiercest, then pull back so that he will be killed. He was carrying his own death warrant proudly because it's a letter from a king. Look at this guy. Some people in our society go, man, he's an idiot. No. This guy died with honor. Something this generation knows nothing about. And I don't mean particular generations. I mean the societal generation we have in America. Station Uriah on the front line. So, verse 16. So Joab assigned Uriah to a spot close to the city wall where he knew the enemy's strongest men were fighting. And when the enemy soldiers came out of the city to fight, Uriah the Hittite was killed along with several other Israelite soldiers. Then Joab sent a battle report to David. He told his messenger, report all the news of the battle to the king. But he might get angry and ask, now listen to this, why did the troops go so close to the city? Didn't they know there would be shooting from the walls? Wasn't Abimelech, son of Gideon, killed at the Thebes by a woman who threw a millstone down on the wall from him? Why would you get so close to the wall? Then tell him Uriah the Hittite was killed too. Now you might say, why is this part important? Because Uriah the Hittite would have never went near the wall of a walled city because Jewish tradition taught them, do not fight this way anymore. When you get too close to the wall, people will throw things on you and you will die in vain. You will die for nothing. But what does Uriah do? Whatever the general told him to do. You see it? You look at Memorial Day in a little different way. Why did our loved ones die on what we call in celebration Memorial Day? They died because they were doing service to their country. They died because they were fighting for a cause of our country. And they were doing it with honor. It's like I saw an interview one time with a Navy SEAL, and this whole platoon got wiped out except for this one Navy SEAL. And the interviewer on 60 Minutes said, so I guess because this ended up being enemy fire, friendly fire, that your men died in vain. And before he could even get vain out of his mouth, that Navy SEAL said, don't you even say it. Those men did not die in vain. They died for the cause of freedom.
Right, man.
Sometimes we die not the way we want to, but it's all for the cause of freedom. Right. Uriah did what he was told to do because he loved his king. He loved his general. He was a warrior. He had been adopted into the Israelite family. Even married a good Jewish woman. And he died for the cause of his country. So the messenger went to Jerusalem and gave a complete report. The enemy came out against us in open fields, and he said, as we chased them back to the city gate, the archers on the wall shot arrows at us. Some of the king's men were killed, including Uriah the Hittite. Now listen to David's response. Well, tell Joab not to be discouraged, David said. The sword devours this one today and that one tomorrow. Wow. His friend, at this point of 30 years, died. Now, that's what he has to say? But think about it. How did Uriah die? Following orders. Sent from the king. Fight harder next time and conquer the city. When Uriah's wife heard that her husband was dead, she mourned for him. When the period of mourning was over, David sent for her and brought her to the palace, and she became one of his wives. It's really sad, isn't it?
It is.
One of his wives. It doesn't say his chief wife or the best wife or just one of his wives. Now, I want you to know something in Jewish culture. It says he waited until she had grieved the allotted time. You know what the allotted time was? 40 days. So 40 days he didn't see her. 40 days he let her grieve. go, wait a minute, isn't David a man after God's own heart? Yes. Why does God say that about him? Because he always repents. That means he always owns what he did wrong. He always asks forgiveness. And he always tries to make it right in his power. Now what you may not see, when he brings Bathsheba into his house and makes her one of his wives, do you know what else he did? It looks like in Chronicles when you read it, Uriah had 2 or 3 of the kids. David adopted them. And what you may not know is when you read the story of David and Bathsheba, not Uriah the Hittite, you realize that that baby that was conceived because of this terrible deed died. God said, I'm not happy, and that child will not be born. Alive. Now, a lot of people will say, gosh, that's just terrible. No, I hate to tell you, when you think about all that children have to endure in this life, going straight to heaven, pretty good deal. Pretty good deal. At the same time, it doesn't mean we should be killing babies.
Right. Amen.
Right? But here's the deal. There was a consequence to the action. And then I'm going to get to the coolest part of the story, as far as I'm concerned. Then she gave birth to a son, but the Lord was displeased with David and what he had done. Nathan the prophet came. Nathan the prophet told David a story about a man going to another man's property and stealing his prime lamb. And David stood up and went, how dare that guy? Show me the man, I'll kill him right now. Nathan said, you're the man. And David went, oh, gosh, you're right. Now, this is something God showed me. God's been showing me stuff on this story, even though I knew the story. I preached the David and Bathsheba story right out of this same scripture at least 5 times in my 13 years. At least 5 times. I've never caught it from Uriah the Hittite's perspective. Till today. I want you to show you something really cool. The greatest king in all of history that ever was Solomon. And up until this last generation in America, everybody knew that. In fact, other nations studied how Solomon became so wealthy. He's known as the richest king that has ever lived, and he even bypasses all the billionaires right now, by the way. Do you know the billionaires, if you put them collectively, all of their money together, and you turned it into gold, it still ain't what Solomon had. Wow. Did you know that? You know, most of the gold that's traded and bought and melted down and all that stuff, you know where it came from? Israel. You know why? Solomon had it all. And when his kingdom was overthrown, it got redispersed. You ever thought about it like that? He was the greatest king that ever lived. Now let me ask you a question. If Uriah the Hittite hadn't have died, and that next child was born, the one that died that Nathan said, this isn't right, then the next child that's born is just another child. Why can Solomon be king? Because he's the firstborn of David and Bathsheba. Only the firstborn kids in Jerusalem became kings. You hear me? So because Uriah the Hittite gave up his life, and David then marries Bathsheba, and the first child is born stillborn, that doesn't count in Jewish society, then Solomon is born, who then becomes king of Israel, and becomes the greatest king that ever lived. That's because Uriah the Hittite gave up his life. Think about that. Is that not a cool way to look at this story?
That's cool.
Is that not also a cool way that God takes terrible things that we do and then transforms them into the people sitting in this room and the people that you know that are children of the King and the people who know, who everybody said would never make it? I can't tell you how many times that's said about me. And when I was a drunk 36 years ago living across the street, I thought it too. And now I stand before you and tell you a story about Uriah the Hittite.
Amen. Amen.
A loyal
Right.
warrior who's not afraid of a fight and will stand no matter what. You know what, Uriah? I never even saw this until this morning. I do this a lot of times. Just before I get up, I look up to see what somebody's name means in Hebrew. I didn't realize this. I always thought Uriah the Hittite was a Hittite name. No. When he got adopted into the culture of Israel, even though he's Uriah the Hittite, it means the one who is the bearer of the Lord of light. It's a Hebrew name. Isn't that cool?
It's amazing. It's amazing.
The one who is the bearer of the Lord of light. In other words, he stands behind God and says, whatever you want done, that's what I'll do.
Right.
Oh my gosh. Then you read this story and you go, oh my gosh. Guys, we need to thank veterans for what they have done. We need to memorialize those in our lives who have given their life for our freedom. Right? And fought for causes of the United States of America that were for the betterment of America.
Yes.
Right? We need to thank them. We need to stand over their grave and thank them.
Yes.
And in this situation, we need to thank Uriah the Hittite
Right.
for giving up his life so that Solomon could even be born. Because do you know what's crazy? This just came to me. Whose lineage comes out of Solomon's lineage? Everybody says it's David. And it's true. But who? Who else is? Jesus. Right? It's the craziest thing. And when you stop and think about it, that's the kind of stuff God does.
Yes.
He's looking for ways to use you. In fact, He has a plan if we'll just get us out of the way.
Right.
If we'll just stop being stupid.
Yep.
And I can say that because I'm stupid on a semi-regular basis. Right? And my wife points it out on a semi-regular basis. And one of the reasons God puts her in my life is to keep me from doing stupid things. So that it makes her look better.
Michelle, he thinks.
Look at her. Her jaw's been dropped that whole sentence. Anyway, I love you guys. I'm for you guys. I want you to see Uriah the Hittite from a whole other angle. And I want you to see his valor, his honor. And I want to thank any veteran or any person in this room who has a family member who died in service of our country. Thank you. They and Uriah the Hittite are probably in God's army.
Yep.
You know what I mean?
Amen.
That's just a cool thing to think about. Be thinking about these things as we go into this time of reflection. If anybody needs to come talk to me.